What is up, everybody? Welcome back to the Click Podcast. I am here with my wonderful co-host, Satch, and today we are going to talk about a very particular subject that has to deal with men and it has to deal with masculinity. I know that's a term that gets thrown around, a lot right now, masculine, feminine, but I think we want to take you in on our own personal journey and then also kind of figure out how we really define it, how it was defined to us, and then how can we actually define it for the future and how we're going to be a masculine man, but almost more likely I say like a balanced masculine man here today. But when I take it back, and I want to bring you guys along this journey with me, I want you to think back when you were, a boy. When you were watching TV or looking at magazines and you're watching shows, how was masculinity actually portrayed to you, right? It was the individual that had the most muscles. He was the confident guy, right? That he could get all the girls, okay? And then you saw that, that was the way to actually achieve, respect and attention from women. That's like number one, especially you try to learn that, in high school when you're trying to you're interested in girls, you're trying to get dating, you're like, all right, this is the body that I was given. How do I actually achieve the girls? And a lot of times you realize even later looking in life, they don't give a shit about the muscles at all, right? They want somebody that they can talk to, somebody that can talk and somebody that's communicating with them. But in addition to that, especially like we're in high school, is we're really figuring out who are the influence that we're going to actually follow. And then we start defining ourselves, just like from, materialism. I want the car. I want the house. I want the money. I want the trip. I want the vacations. But there's a certain word that you and I discuss this off camera that really ties to that, right? And I think it actually is probably two words. Because when we see as young men that when you have all of these things, you have power, okay? And then I think also respect can go hand in hand, with that. Because when you have all these things, women respect you and they'll talk to you. When you have all these things, men will look up to you and they respect you. And then they actually want to be a part of what your journey really is. And that is great, okay? There are men that are like that, but I think we really have to take a look at ourselves and really define that. I've been an individual that's achieved a lot of great things, right? Same here with Satch. And I guarantee that the same outlook on masculinity that we had when we were boys is not the same outlook that we have on masculinity now that we're in our 30s or 40s or even young men in general. And I say this because we want to educate young men, but also men, of our age, millennials and beyond, of how does this look for you? And do I still define myself by the same principles of what I thought masculinity was as a boy? And Satch, you brought up some great points when we were doing this and having a conversation previously about some great points that you've discovered, or I think a really good definition of masculinity. I want you to share that with the audience on exactly what you shared with me. What was that point?
Yeah, this was a life-changing video that I saw, a little Instagram clip. So, shout out to Bedros Killian for putting this out there and articulating this concept in this way, and something that really broke everything open for me. So in the video, he said there's a difference between being a good man and a nice guy. And a good man is humble. He treats people with respect. He cares. He's vulnerable. But he stands his ground. He has his principles. He has his boundaries. He takes care of his family, and he fights for what he believes in. And that was a definition that I didn't really even knew existed, because like you said, masculinity has been portrayed to us. And so either we choose to accept this portrayal of it, which is really comes out of ego and power, right? Masculinity are these rah-rah guys, whether they're big and muscular or they're rich or they're powerful, they're running the world, and that's masculinity. These are men, right? And men are treating everyone pretty shitty. And so it's like, well, I don't want to do that because that's not naturally me. So then I'll just be a nice guy. And that's where I found myself for a long time. And I accepted what came with that, which is I want to treat people well. I'm a good human being. I don't need power and ego and to look down on people. I don't need to be that. I don't need to be the rah-rah guy to feel good. So then I'm a nice guy, because that's the only other definition. And a nice guy is I'm just going to be nice to everyone. But hey, most people aren't nice, so I'm going to get run over. I'm going to be pushed over. I'm always going to be giving. And that's a pretty shitty place to be. That's not very
it's
masculine,
kinda
right? And so this definition changed it for me, because I was like, wait a minute, I don't have to be that, which I am naturally just not or don't agree with, but I can still be a strong, powerful man by being a good man, not a nice guy.
Right.
And so I just love the way that was put. So I'd share that. And then a part of that to get there for me was getting comfortable in my own skin, right? And so when you're not chasing, you're not overcompensating because you're insecure, because a lot of ego and power comes out of insecurity. You want power because you're just not, you don't feel good about yourself. You need somebody else to make you feel good about yourself.
Yeah.
So to be a good man, you have to first get to the point where you're secure with yourself and just comfortable in your own skin, and just be able to be yourself.
I love that. That is, if you guys can take anything from this episode, take exactly what Satch, said there. Be good with yourself. Be good with who you see in the mirror every single morning, guys, because we know it. If you've been through the experience and you've had tremendous success, monetarily and with all these material things, that's great. But you realize very quickly that I did it and nothing else changed. And I'm still not the happy individual. In fact, all my relationships, can be shit. But when we go back to like defining what does it actually mean for you, and we talk about like the ego, I think like when we see the masculinity, we do see these rah-rah guys, especially now with what we were talking about before, influence. Like we see a lot of men that have influence and they're these rah-rah guys, and that we define as, all right, that's how I need to be masculine because that's what women want. I think it really all just stems back to that. Is that what women want? Is that who we want to be? Is that how we want to show up? And to me, like we were talking about, I think it's finding actually having a good balance. Rather than being the rah-rah and making all the money and have power and ego, for me, I'd rather have vulnerability. I feel now more than ever, especially men, and I'm talking to men specifically, men that are vulnerable have the true power. They have the true influence. Why? Because they are in touch with themselves. They know exactly who they are. They know exactly who they were, but they also know exactly where they're going and all the men that they're going to take them with you. And what I mean by that is because as children, men are taught, don't cry, suck it up, don't talk about it, hide your emotions. And they're telling us to do things that are innately us as human beings. We are social creatures. It's okay for women to talk about their feelings, but it's not okay for men to talk about their feelings. And when you see men of power and influence and leadership, they're actually being vulnerable. That is a true leadership quality that I resonate with. Why? Because he has balls. And he had courage is the biggest one I like. He had courage to talk about the hard things, the hard topics, right? And I see that as a lot with veterans showing up. It's like, hey, boys, I know the fucked up shit that we saw. I know the fucked up shit that we did. Let's talk about it. And then we realize that our relationships are better from it. But doesn't you even have to go through something that drastic? We can even just talk about some of the childhood traumas that we had. Or, that relationship that we had. I was like, men, I'm saying this because I'm saying it's okay. It's okay to speak up. And it's okay to speak out. Because if we want to be leaders within our own life, we have to understand that we have to be honest with ourselves. And I think that's very hard for a lot of men. We need to be honest on how we're really feeling and know that it's okay to have an outlet. There are other men out there that feel the same way. There are other women out there that even feel the same way, but they see a leadership quality when a man really has the ability to tap into his feelings, his emotions. He knows how to harness that energy, but he also knows how to, one, compartmentalize it, but two, how to maybe even restructure it for a positive way. How do you feel about that, Sech?
Yeah, I think vulnerability is such a important word, and I understand. I think why men who view masculinity in sort of the typical way shy away from that word because it's misrepresented in its definition. So when we say vulnerable, the image that I think comes to mind is weakness.
Yeah, we talked about
about this, and it's feeling and an emotion and crying and it's soft, right? Mm-hmm. And if men just biologically are the providers, right? And so we can't let our guard down. We can't have that weakness because we'll get killed. That's just like how the primitive brain will work. But vulnerability isn't that. It's not actually crying and you can be vulnerable that way, but that's not what it means. That's one outlet of it. What vulnerability really means is just being able to admit when you're wrong and you've made a mistake and that things went south, and owning that. It's vulnerability is being able to ask for help. Vulnerability is sometimes being able to go deep and open up, and that could get emotional. It doesn't always have to, but it's not this like weak sissy thing of like, oh, I'm just going to cry about every little thing that happens to me. And I think that's why men shy away from that word. But you've said it best. It's actually freeing and it's empowerment, because the level of trust, right, that you gain with people, whether it's your significant other or the people you lead, when you're able to admit that you're wrong or that you need help or that you're not perfect and you need them, you're bringing more people together. And that's what manhood and masculinity is, right? It's the caretaker in essence, right? And sometimes the caretaker has to let people inside to be able to connect more and grow together. So, I want to ask you a question on this topic, because you're both in my mind, right? You're a big guy, you're a strong man, you're macho, you ride the dune buggies and do all the crazy stuff. And so you're this macho guy, but at the same time, you're very vulnerable and you're very open and you lead with a lot of love. Like, it's uncomfortable for most people. It was uncomfortable for me when I first met you. And now you have a family. And so, you're connecting a lot of these topics we've talked about the last 6 episodes together and doing it through your masculinity. So really, I'd like you, for the audience, not just men, just for all of us, to kind of maybe summarize how you've put a lot of these pieces together and kept this feeling of being a man while also going through all these processes and taking care of so many people.
Yeah. Well, I'll take people back to the journey of when I was 19 and I had my spiritual awakening. Okay. If you guys didn't listen to previous episodes, it was literally like God gave me an instant download to see the world in a beautiful way, a positive manner. But one of those things was He also gave me a dump of emotions. And I had to learn to process those. And I was actually going through a hard relationship at the time and trying to really define like who I was and why am I experiencing all these emotions, but how am I going to carry myself? And how am I going to handle them in a way that's benefiting for me? Okay. And I think with men, we hide from our emotions. I think we're trained to hide from our emotions. But I think the more that we hide, the bigger that they become. And when you really define, what I see with like the relationship we have with ourselves, we begin to live a lie. Is a big one. And then when we get into a relationship later in life and we're married and we have kids and you still don't have an ability to share your emotions with the person that you said I do and committed your life to with, they don't understand that. They don't understand why you are the way that you are and how come you can't just be vulnerable with me and tell me what you're feeling and what's going on, and we can have this conversation. Understanding emotions is very, very important for men, but understanding the emotions on how they actually impact you as a person. But then I think a really hard one is actually communicating those. That's the step that takes a lot of courage. And men, if you're listening to this, I want you to really just figure out how you can start communicating your emotions, especially to those that you love the most, right? Because when you can figure out a very effective way to communicate your emotions on how you feel, your relationships will become 10 times stronger. And I can say that as a true testament because my relationship with Savory is more beautiful than I ever thought it would be. My relationship with my parents is even more beautiful than I can even explain. the relationship that I have with my brothers now is even more gratifying than I ever thought it could be. Why? Because I understood the power of vulnerability, and I understood that it was a trait of masculinity that I wanted to carry, but I also wanted to be an outlet for other men to come to and say, it's okay. And it is. It is okay. It's okay to talk to other men about this. It's okay to be vulnerable, to talk to your dad, to talk to your brother, to talk to your wife, to talk to your kids, about how you're feeling. That is the true power and what masculinity, I think, really needs to be changed, now and for the future on how we want to show up, is understanding emotions. To answer your question, it's understanding your emotions, how they impact you, but then how can you harness that energy in a positive way, not a negative way, a positive way. And when you ask yourself those guys, all right, these are the emotions I feel, you need to understand, am I going to react from these emotions, or am I going to respond from these emotions? And when you respond, it's out of love. When you react, sometimes it's instantaneous, it's out of ego. And it's out of like disrespect. This person's disrespecting me, so I'm going to go this way. But naturally that it's probably not going to have a positive outcome, right? But if I respond in a positive way from love, and I am open to the perspective of this conversation, I'm going to diffuse it. I'm going to bring it down. We're going to have a discussion, not a fight, a discussion. So going back to, being really in tune with your emotions, how to harness that energy, is a true way of how I define masculinity and vulnerability for myself. And that's what I encourage men to do. And I've given you some of those tips, and you've seen it. And tell me, has it worked?
100%. I
Okay.
mean, I've watched you. Like I said, pay a lot of attention when I see someone clicking on all cylinders, and that's a rare thing. And I see you clicking on all cylinders, so there's this curiosity of like, how is that happening? And I think when I think about masculinity with you, it's like I said, it's all encompassing. There's actually very little ego, if any ego. You lead with love, and that was like our first topic, right? So
Yeah.
you have self-love because you're very secure and comfortable and you know yourself. You lead with love. You have a purpose, and you're outspoken about your purpose, and that's not necessarily your job, but even through your job, you're living your purpose, right? Mm-hmm. Because you're connecting with people and helping people. You know what you want out of life. You're disciplined. You're not highly distracted. You know what entertainment you enjoy and when to enjoy it, but you're not chasing everything and outside of your life is entertaining. So I'm watching all of this, and I feel our whole podcast is really, you're living that journey of what we've been saying on this podcast. You've explicitly defined success, which is through love, through your family, through these relationships, through having these conversations. That's success for you, to be able to be in that world and live in that world and share that. And I think your success is all encompassing, and I think that's what I find, because you're doing great in business. Your relationship is incredible with your girl. I actually think that the Click 2 podcast should be just you and her talking about relationships, because we can all learn a lot from that, because there's two sides to that story. So, with the kids and there's so many dynamics in your life, and yet you're always giving and open, and you have time for everyone. And I think because you're light, because you're free, because you're not carrying those burdens and restricting them, and so you don't have all this weight. I always should say, you don't have all this unnecessary weight on your shoulders that's not helping anyone, because you're vulnerable and you're able to release that. So now you're able to take on weight that does move everything forward. The weight of the responsibility with your children and the people that work for you, and having everyone move forward in the right light, and being that leader. Yeah. To me, it puts it all together. So I'm talking about you in this, but really am expressing this journey that we're trying to express through this podcast, that you can. I want to end with this. You can't have it all. Nobody can have it all.
Right.
What you can have is you can have everything that's important to you. So if you can define what that is, and then follow the journey of the podcast of, that purpose, the definition of success, not having the discipline to get after what you want, because distractions will take you off of that path. if you're distracted, you're not going to get everything you want and that's important to you. But if you follow this and you lead through this and you let go and shed that through vulnerability, all that burden, then you can have everything that's important to you. And I think that we're both in a place right now, whether we're right there or we're working through that process, we see the things that are important to us manifesting themselves in our lives.
Yeah, I think that's wonderful. And there's one thing I want to touch on where you're talking about these weights, right? And guys, trust me, like when you have emotional weights that you carry on your back, that'll drag you into the ground. And I've been there, you know, even myself. I know Satch has been through the experience to where there's just this thing on your back that you feel is always there, whether it's from your last relationship, whether it's from your childhood, whether it's from the relationship with your father or your mother or your kids or what have you. Okay, those are things that your soul is telling you that are unsettled, and there's emotions there that you need to explore and go through them, or maybe you need to have that phone call. Or maybe you need to have that conversation. Or maybe even that conversation is with yourself, which is probably the biggest one, right? Probably the biggest conversation. And we say that, and I know that Satch went all through all the principles that we had for this podcast because, guys, when you show up as this man and you take yourself through that process, the masculinity that you naturally show up is just who you are as a person. But you understood that the new term of masculinity on how I'm going to be as a human being is for the greater good of humanity and for myself. And I think we want to end it on there, guys, because there's way more that we can talk about and get in deep. And there's going to be some more stuff that we have and different interviews that we have, you know, with each other and other guests that are really going to dive into specifics on these topics. But we want to say, one, thank you so much for tuning in. I know these topics were very, very important to us. They resonate deeply from our heart and from our souls. And we just want to say thank you, you know, from absolute gratitude for tuning in. And if this has helped you in any way, shape, or form, please let us know. In addition, please share it with somebody. Share it with somebody that you feel may need this right now, because that's how love changes and transforms, is by sharing and by exploring and by being abundant. This conversation is to be abundant, to be shared with the world and our community, and we want to do nothing but create a positive impact. But I want to give a big thank you to my boy Satch here for doing this podcast with me. I can't wait for the next episodes. Until then, guys, always live with love. We'll see you on the next time. Thank you.